And this is a video diving into the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver and tight end situation here, and what we learned specifically week one from their contest against Washington on Monday Night Football. And so one of the most popular questions I was getting going into week one, and some people on Twitter know me. I'm a pretty big Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and for those of you that didn't know that, I am. And I follow all the teams closely, but I do follow Pittsburgh particularly closely. And so, but one of the most popular questions I was getting is, who is going to be that second option for Ben in the passing game, or who is going to be that third fantasy player not named Ben Roethlisberger, like a flex option that was going to put up points for Pittsburgh, because obviously it was a high over-under. Pittsburgh going to put up points against just about everybody, and Washington's defense really is not that great. So it's a very good question, and it was a kind of a tough situation because nobody was really. I was actually a little surprised how non-definitive some people were about it. Usually, some people have like a really strong angle on this, and a lot of people just kind of wanted to take a wait and see approach to this. I was in that boat to a certain extent, but I'm going to start about this. Well, I'll start from the perspective of why it's such a great question, because when you look at Pittsburgh here in the past over the last few seasons, they have always had somebody on the off. It's actually true for the offensive line too. But let's just, even if you just keep it to the offensive skill players, there has always been a key player injured or suspended. They have never had like everybody on the field at once. Someone's always suspended or someone's always hurt. That's applied for Ben Roethlisberger being injured, game here and there over the last few years. That's certainly applied to Le'Veon Bell for injury or for suspension. Certainly applied for Martavis Bryant with suspension. Now he's out for the whole year. Injury is certainly applied for Marcus Wheaton right now. And then obviously, and now we can take a look at tight ends here. Heath Miller has retired, and Ladarius Green, who is supposed to be the replacement, is on the pup. And quite frankly, I don't know when or if he's going to be back. At this point, that's just a weird situation. I don't know. There's a lot of different reports depending what you believe out there. So we'll just wait and see on that. But for the meantime, right now, it looked like to me very clearly that there was a clear void at tight end to be filled, and Jesse James was kind of the lead guy for that. And this was just a unique situation because there were so many familiar pieces that were out. We just haven't seen this many pieces out at once. So we knew there was but at the same time we knew there was a clear void at tight end. And so this is why I was recommending Jesse James. He had been working with the ones pretty much all of preseason. The only real red flag I had about Jesse going into week one was the fact that he's had some drop issues in the past, and it's particularly in a few preseason games I'm thinking of right now. But nevertheless, he's been getting a lot more reps with the ones now that Heath has retired and Ladarius has been injured. So it's a great opportunity for Jesse to work with the ones, and he's been working in the system now for a few years now, and so it logically made perfect sense. There wasn't a lot of buzz about him, fantasy or daily fantasy world, and quite frankly, I was a little surprised at that. So if you take a look at this, what I have highlighted right here, Jesse James right here. As far as the tight ends go, yes, he started and he played 100% of the offensive snaps on Monday night. So obviously, that is a very good sign if you are a believer in Jesse James. If Jesse James, I know this is DFS related, but if you're in your fantasy league and Jesse James is on the waiver wire, unless you're on like a 6-man or an 8-man league or something like that, I would pick him up right now. I'm just saying that. But in any case, in DFS perspective, though, it's perfect actually right now moving forward for Jesse James as well. The reasoning for that is if we take a look here at the Pittsburgh receiving box score, and I'm just using ESPN. I know there are better box score or better platforms to get better box scores and data information, but it's just ESPN lays it out very clearly. I think it's a great layout, just me personally, and it's just easier for you guys to see. And we're doing something basic here. So if we take a look at the receiving, Jesse James, 5 catches, 31 yards on 7 targets, and one of those targets I don't remember. There's 2 incompletions there. One of which I don't remember, but the second I definitely remember. It was on a 3rd down and about 8, and I believe it was in the second half. And I believe Ben just flat out underthrew Jesse James. Jesse ran like a 15, 20 yard, it was like a skinny post or like a deep out route. And Ben just underthrew him. And I'm guessing that based on his reaction, and it looked like it, maybe Jesse ran a little too deep and he didn't cut at the right point or something. That's possible. But nevertheless, or maybe it was just the fact that there's still some chemistry stuff there to be worked out there. But regardless, it's one ball. And Jesse was very much part of this game plan. 100% of the snaps, like I said, clearly getting the receptions in the passing game as much as just about every other player on the team. Antonio obviously with a few more targets and a couple more receptions, as that should be no surprise whatsoever. And so the good news why this is moving forward is Jesse's part of it, but he also didn't have like some outstanding game. He didn't like score 2 touchdowns and have all the public, or all the a lot of the public people or a lot of the people just be like, oh my gosh, he had so many fantasy points and his ownership gets spiked. It wasn't anything like that, or it wasn't like Jesse James caught 10 balls or something and his PPR number got stacked up. It was a solid number, but it wasn't a great number that's going to jack up his ownership percentage. And there's still not a lot of buzz about him heading into week 2 or here in the future. And I think because he's getting 100% of snaps, there is no sign of Ladarius Green's on the pup, and there's no sign of him going to sign anybody else. So I think that snap count percentage is there to stay. And obviously, look, the Steelers. They're week 2 against the Bengals, which you may not think is the greatest matchup in the world because the Bengals do have a solid defense. There's no doubt about it. Having said that, Pittsburgh is going to put up points on pretty much every offense right now. I mean, when they get up against very good teams, it's very often a shootout. If people want to say like, okay, what's one of the toughest places to play, on the road, people would probably say Seattle. Pittsburgh played it, even though they lost, they were in a shootout at Seattle last year. They've been, even when they were at home against Denver, I think it was last year or 2 years ago. No, it was last year because Osweiler was playing quarterback. Last year when Pittsburgh was playing Denver, that was a shootout at home at Heinz. I think it was an October game, if I remember. Maybe it was November. But nevertheless, Pittsburgh's always going to be in these types of shootouts. And so they're playing Cincinnati, and just if you take a look at the over-under perspective and what the odds makers say, it is the 3rd highest over-under of the day, 48.5. Just shy of Giants and Saints, which is no shocker by any means of the imagination. And Tampa, Arizona's 50. That's a little high in my estimation. I think that's a slight overreaction to week 1. I don't know. I'm not in the business of betting NFL right now, but I kind of like the under there. In any case, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, though, very high over-under at 48.5. And so Pittsburgh's offense is going to put up points. So Jesse James right now, moving forward, I think is a great option in cash and GPP formats, just because he's still relatively cheap, clearly still in the field, and he's still not getting much buzz. So there you go as far as Jesse goes. Now, for the wide receiver, that's kind of a completely different animal. So there were 4 wide receivers that played Monday night. And the one wide receiver who did not play was Marcus Ween, of course, listed here below, just below the highlighted players. So Antonio Brown, 97% of snaps, probably wasn't 100 because he missed one play because he had to retie his shoe or something, or maybe he just wasn't in the victory formation. He's playing the entire time. He's all good, and clearly had an awesome game. This is where I really wasn't recommending any wide receivers from Pittsburgh to anybody other than Antonio Brown going into this game, because I felt like it was fairly predictable to say that Eli Rogers would be the slot receiver and Sammy Coates would be the number 2. You never know how the distribution is going to work out when you've never seen and just how they're going to be utilized and what the bottom line snap count percentage is going to be. I mean, it was fairly predictable, but I didn't, it's really tough to tell sometimes. And I thought you were pretty much, if you were going to play one of them, you were just gambling in a GPP if you were going to use one of them. So that's why I didn't recommend using any of them outside of Antonio Brown. But now that we got a week's worth of data here to look at, we can dive into this. So clearly, and you could see this by watching the game, of course, too, Eli Rogers and Sammy Coates. Rogers had 69% of snaps, and Sammy Coates had 65% of snaps. Coates was the Z wide receiver, the number 2, the Z wide receiver, the number 2 guy on the outside opposite of Antonio Brown for pretty much the entire game. Eli Rogers was the slot guy. Darius Hayward-Bay came in on, I think, some occasional 4 wide receiver sets, and then obviously gave Rogers and or Coates a breather as well, just throughout the game here and there a little bit, and that's why Darius Hayward-Bay 22% of snaps. So there you go. That is a formula, or that makes perfect sense to me in terms of what they were trying to do and how it played out. The key here is now if we take a look at the distribution of the teams. The distribution of the players in terms of how the targets and receptions went. Eli Rogers, 6 catches on 7 targets. Getting over being sick this week. I'm just running a little short in breath there. I'm fine. I'm all good. Sammy Coates, 2 catches for 56 yards. Obviously he caught a couple. He had one really deep ball. Certainly, well, actually they were both deep balls because, there was like a 42. It was like a 40 yard, right? 40 long of 42. So there you go. Yeah, the one deep ball down the sideline. They had another catch in there as well. But he only got targeted 3 times. And D'Angelo Williams had 6 catches. No surprise. Le'Veon Bell's out, so he was going to get some PPR value. No surprise there. We'll not have that kind of PPR stuff once Le'Veon is back, obviously. So between Eli and Sammy, here's how I see this going forward, because Marcus Wheaton is questionable for week 2. Marcus Wheaton is an outside receiver, and Martavis Bryant is no longer part of the equation. So the real question is, who is Marcus Wheaton going to pull snaps away from? Is it going to be Rodgers? Is it going to be Coates? Is it going to be Darius Hayward-Bay? Is it going to be a combination? And I believe he will be pulling predominantly away from Sammy Coates. Now, Sammy Coates, he's had some drop issues, and he is coming from, he's not a rookie, but he's a young guy, and he is somebody who I think is still learning the playbook to a certain extent. While Auburn is up tempo faster than Pittsburgh, their playbooks could not be any more different. They're polar opposites almost. Even though they do like to do a lot of up-tempo stuff and catch you off guard and attack your weaknesses type of thing for different reasons. But anyways, there are different playbooks. So I think Sammy Coates has a pretty big learning curve still kind of to go through. He does have talent. He's a fast guy. He's athletic, but his hands still aren't that great, and he's still got to learn the playbook and get better on some of the fundamentals, I think, as far as him being kind of a go-to number 2 receiver type of guy. And so, but obviously schematically, since he was playing the outside number 2 guy, and that's kind of what Whedon plays, I think, and Whedon we obviously know has been, pretty at least a solid, admirable player for Pittsburgh so far. He's going to be the guy taking away from him. I think Eli Rogers' snap count of 69% is not changing. So Coates is going to take a hit. This is where the real question is going to be, though, because if you take a look at last year, Martavis Bryant and Marcus Wheaton were at times basically taking snaps away from one another. Sometimes they were on the field at the same time, but sometimes they were actually taking snaps away from one another. So what's going to be interesting here is when you have Marcus Wheaton and Sammy Coates, are they going to pull snaps away from each other, or is Marcus Wheaton just going to basically take away all of Sammy Coates' percentage, and will Marcus Wheaton's percentage be 65% or get 2/3 of the snaps like that? And will Darius Hayward-Bay's change the same? That's going to be kind of the thing that I think we should take a wait and see approach. Is Coates, or not Coates? I think Coates is going to be kind of out of the equation at this point, but it's going to be a wait and see on Marcus Wheaton when he comes back to see how many snaps he gets in comparison to Coates and Hayward-Bay, basically, and seeing how that snap distribution stands out. I don't think Eli Rogers is going to change at all. I really liked what I saw from Rogers in week 1, and for those people that do follow Pittsburgh pretty closely, I know coaching staffs, just generally speaking all the time, will say, they really like this guy. But really, Pittsburgh has especially spoken highly of Eli Rogers and how excited they were about him. And I think you had a great example of that week 1. He and Ben seemed like they've been working together for 3 or 4 years, the way that was going out there. And so I think, again, like I said, Rogers is in I think Rogers is definitely on my radar, and he should be on everybody's radar here moving forward from a fantasy perspective. And so the last point I will make about this, though, because about the wide receivers and specifically with Eli Rogers moving forward, cash versus GPP here. I don't like Eli Rogers in cash formats, and the reason why is regardless if Le'Veon's back or not, you're still going to have Pittsburgh running the ball a fair amount with D'Angelo or Le'Veon, and Antonio's still clearly the number 1 guy. And I think there's a low floor here with Eli Rogers as a slot receiver. It's just, I really wouldn't want to mess with that, even if he's coming off like a big game or 2. That just seems risky to me. But at the same time, from a GPP standpoint, I think he has tremendous upside. And where I think he's going to have the most upside here, and I'm not trying to say something like super bold here, but again, he's going to do particularly well in the matchups that are against teams that have good rush defenses and weak secondaries. And the reason why I'm saying that is because Pittsburgh is very good in particular, and Ben does this a lot, and when he just checks at the line of scrimmage, because they're a no-huddle offense, and he's basically calling the plays as he's going along, he's very good at attacking the opponent's weaknesses. And he's going to basically dare the defense to either A, play more nickel and dime packages, or B, he's going to dare them to put a linebacker on Eli Rogers, which is just a complete mismatch, in my opinion. So those are the spots I think Eli Rogers is going to do particularly well in here moving forward into week 2 or the rest of the season. As far as week 2 specifically, do I like anybody? Well, Ben and Antonio and D'Angelo Williams are always in play with no Le'Veon, and no Martavius involved. So those guys are obviously going to be in play, certainly right now. But as far as is Jesse in play and is Eli in play for week 2? Jesse, I would say, is definitely in play for week 2 just because he's still reasonably priced. And like I said, not many people are that high on him, and there's a good over-under. For Eli Rogers, I mean, you could use him a little bit in GPPs. I think that's reasonable. But at the same time, I would also say that Cincinnati's pass defense and the rush defense, they're both pretty solid. And I just mean that their secondary is not much weaker than their rush defense. So I don't think it's the greatest matchup in the world for him. And he will probably get a little bit of ownership because people did like seeing, he 6 catches, 59 yards, and a touchdown. I know the touchdown was just that crazy bank luck TD. That was awesome for me as a fan. But at the same time, it was, he's fortunate there. But like as far as the catches and the targets, that's pretty sustainable. And I would just maybe take maybe one more week wait and see approach with Eli Rogers just to make sure that wasn't a fluke. I don't think it was, but we'll maybe just take one more week and make sure the snap count's still the same and make sure that's all good still here moving forward. But I think there are going to be some good matchups for Eli here moving forward down the road the rest of the year. Last thing I'm just going to talk about actually specifically with this game is I just want to talk about this game in general between these two teams to wrap this up. If you read a recap of this game, you talk to your buddy about this game, pretty much everyone's going to say Pittsburgh crushed Washington. And I'm a Steelers fan, I do not think that was the case. This is a very misleading final in my estimation. Pittsburgh's slight advantage in yards, 435 to 384. Pittsburgh's slight edge in time of possession, and +1 in turnovers. One of those turnovers that Washington had should not have been a turnover because it was at the very end of the game in garbage time, and it was in the red zone, and James Harrison picked off Kirk Cousins, and the ball clearly hit the ground, and there was no challenge or I don't know, they just said the heck with it on the review because there was 10, 20 seconds left on the clock? I don't remember exactly, but the game was over, and the only way it wasn't over was for fantasy purposes. And so they just let it go. And so the turnover should have been 1-1, and quite frankly, Washington should have had at least another touchdown on the board. And the reason why I think these teams are a little bit more even, and I'm not saying they're even, Pittsburgh is a better team than Washington, and Ben's a better quarterback than Kirk, so that's certainly a chunk of it. But Washington averaged 7 yards per play, and Pittsburgh only averaged 6.4. So Washington actually had the advantage in the yards per play perspective. In Pittsburgh, Washington had horrific field position for much of the night. They had a lot of long drives. Jordan Reed just Pittsburgh's defense couldn't get off the field. Pittsburgh's secondary is still definitely very much a work in progress. Definitely Pittsburgh's secondary is still a good defense to target. Moving forward in DFS, their front seven's still solid, but the secondary is a whole other story. People forget Ike Taylor retired as well, who was like their best corner and really their only great corner. Troy Polamalu's obviously gone, blah blah blah, but they're still trying to figure out the secondary thing. Their secondary's banged up with some of their draft picks that they've gotten. So you got to keep that in mind as well. And they're just very young. And so overall. Like I said, Washington was very much marching the football down the field. But when they got to the red zone, they tightened up. They couldn't get Kirk made a couple bad throws. It's just tougher to score in the red zone in general. And they just the yards did not meet the points basically. And Washington should have scored more points than they did. That's just the bottom line here. So this is just a misleading final. Not saying so. It's just my way of saying Washington's not as bad as you think, and Pittsburgh's not as elite as you maybe might think. Although I do think Pittsburgh is probably one of the best teams in the NFL. It's just not that big of a difference from the top to the middle. So, anyways, that's it for this video. Hope you learned something or like this. And if you do, please remember to like and subscribe to our Twitch and YouTube channels. And then, of course, you can follow me on Twitter at NickUskevich and DailyFantasyWinners at DFantasyWinners. All right, thanks.